Mark, do you want to address any of this? Mark Goldstone is our lawyer of the law, so.
The whole versus humanitarian case is actually still good law. It's binding precedent at the Supreme Court. I think a lot of people are rightfully nervous about that case, which defines material support to a group that's on someone else's list for terrorism as being extremely broad. My feeling about that case is, as long as the current makeup of the court is as it is, we're likely to have that kind of very bad decision continue to be the law. Over time, as we get different justices in there, I think a decision like that is likely to be overturned because it's excessively broad. What I counsel groups to do whenever they're involved with sending money overseas or receiving donations is err on the side of caution and refuse a donation or give back something that you just don't know what the source of it is. I'm not talking about $10,000, which is the trigger for federal banking legislation. I'm talking about if you get a check in from someone that may appear on some list somewhere, it's easier to reject it, just send it back with a little note and reject it. It's very hard because the groups are all shoestring groups that want to take in those $10 donations. Yeah. But under the current environment, it's easier to just reject that donation. And that's on an incoming donation. On an external donation, you've got to be extremely careful about who you're sending your dollars to, particularly when you're sending your dollars overseas. We are in an atmosphere of repression, and we have to follow the law as it is now. I don't think the law will be that way forever, but we're in a period of repression right now, post 9/11. So when I counsel groups, I'm counseling on the side of, I'm advising that Holder is good law. I don't think it's good law, but it's the law right now. It's standing law right now. So
Mark,
it's a very dangerous, we're in a very dangerous period.
Mark, I wonder if you could address this woman's issue though, which was more about what are the boundaries of somebody being able to come in and infiltrate or inform her to be able to manipulate anybody? What can they and cannot?
Well, there's no boundaries because what happens is our movements are open movements. We want people to come and join our movements. We put things on the internet, we advertise our open meetings, we advertise our demonstrations, and 9 times out of 10, it comes to the attention of law enforcement. So they join our meetings. In defense of them, they say, this is an open forum. So we don't want to have admissions charges to our events. We don't want to have card-carrying member-limited events. We want to attract people. In fact, if you read the event in which Max and the other people were designated as domestic terrorists, it was fascinating because the groups that were targeted had 3 and 4 and 5 people at their public rallies. And this informant would say, oh, I attended a rally in a church basement. There was 4 people that were agitating against the death penalty. They were going to hold some banners up at the State House next Tuesday. I recommend that this investigation continue. And I'm like, WTF? I mean, what? They weren't even talking about committing civil disobedience, let alone breaking windows, and yet the investigation went on for like 2 years. And then, of course, they lied and said the investigation only went on for 18 months or whatever. It went on for longer than they had even admitted. So we're in a very, very perilous time. We want to be open, but yet we know when we're open that they can sit there and observe us and film us and record us. And it's very difficult. There's no easy answer to that. But as Kit suggested, when you start hearing either crazy people or crazy suggestions, you need to disassociate yourself in as public a fashion as possible. You have to have nonviolence guidelines for your groups, and you have to have non-property destruction guidelines for your groups, and you have to train on it and be visible and put it up on your websites, and you have to believe it. And the minute a person, either because they're a terrorist or because they're mentally disabled, is violating your guidelines, just because you're an open group, you don't have to accept that person. There's nothing wrong with you excluding that person, whether it's from your public meeting or demonstration or whatever, or in fact turning someone in if they're engaging in criminal conduct. Why are we so open that if someone's talking about blowing up a bridge, that we don't feel comfortable in turning that person in?
Jerry and then Thomas.
I wanted to ask about the attempt to get allies on this and to work together. I'm still optimistic about environmental groups, although gosh, you tried a lot harder, and I respect the effort. Having just grilled Ron Paul when he came to Howard University, mean, I look at that and I'm like, I just don't, I can't see it. I mean, these are people who are, you know, believe in rugged individualism only, cannot, you know, and I find it hard to read. I mean, I love reaching across the aisle, but I'm not optimistic that would be a long-term strategy.
Why not? I mean, you can agree on certain issues. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, everybody.
Right, and you always want to find the areas of commonality, right? And you can, but even in all the great movements, you know, I mean, just think about the March on Washington, right? I mean, it's not like you can find. I mean, all of these groups will feel like they're the minority. Go back to right now. We know that the majority of people do not necessarily agree with us, right? And we are dissenting because we are not the majority, right? The right-wing wackos, that too, right? They also feel that way. They feel oppressed by their government, right? We both mistrust government, right? But coming from radically different places. I see the commonality, right? I'm with you on that, right? But I worry about it effectively. I mean, I just don't. I don't see an effective partnership there in the making. I'm more optimistic about other environmental groups, right, than about patriot groups. But I mean, has anyone seen success on this yet? What do you, I mean, this is what I want. I mean, I'm looking for a good optimistic story. I think it can be done.
Be a little more
But
specific
I'm
with
looking
your
for
question. Anybody seen success?
What, in reaching out, okay? Like you've had
Well, I could.
environmental groups. I'm, you know, we
Meaning expanding the parameters, like working with maybe a liberal Republican. That's the question.
Well, we're even a conservative Republican. You know, anyone who's worried about their dissent being squelched.
Well, could I?
Right? And we've done this thing with the crazy delegate from the other part of Maryland, right? But
Well, yeah. I mean, Dwyer. Say what you will about, you know, his personal life,
And I'll say a lot about
the
public
drunk
life.
boating and whatnot. But he was right on this, and he got a lot of people to show up for it, and they said, you know, the right things about it. I think that when you can work with somebody, you ought to, and you shouldn't rule it out. They brought people. They had good points to make. I wouldn't get on the same testify with them about a gun bill, but I would about the NDAA bill, and I did. And
I don't
so,
think you're suggesting you wouldn't.
yeah, okay.
yeah,
I'm just saying that was
we also reached out. I'm not critical of that.
Well,
I'm not-
you were asking for an example, and there was an example.
Right.
It didn't end in victory, but it was an example of working together on something. I think that they might be willing to join in a rapid response network under the right conditions. You know, I think as far as the lady's question, I was wondering about whether you might inform us about the and maybe Martine and Max as well. There was some legislation in Maryland that responded to the state police infiltration, and I thought that there was one aspect of it where they said they had to have a reasonable, articulable suspicion to point to. Now, they didn't have to share that, as I recall, with anyone, but if it got out, they had to be able to say there was this or that reasonable suspicion in a way that there wasn't for these groups that had been infiltrated.
That's not my recollection
Okay.
of the bill that did pass, because there were a lot of pre-drafts with Jamie Raskin that were much meatier and much better. But the one that passed, I recall the upshot being the chief of police had to sign off on the approval to have a group in a political advocacy citizen group infiltrate.
But
that's all I recall. So
well,
but I'm not sure.
I agree that it was inadequate and that it left it in the police's hands. But that person had to be able to say,
Yeah.
this is why.
Yeah.
He had to be able to, or she had to be able to say, there's X reasons, X, Y, and Z why I'm doing this, in a way that would not have been the case.
Right.
At least wouldn't have passed the laugh test with with the death penalty or peace groups that got infiltrated. So, but that's my, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't have the bill, the statute language in my head. That's what I thought happened.
No, I think there's a combination of things that were ultimately in the bill, which is there has to be a sign-off at a much higher level than just a investigatory process that never begins and never ends. They never figured out who authorized the investigation of the peace groups, and it kind of never ended. It just kept going. So yeah, in terms of who can authorize it, there has to be a finite beginning and a finite ending, and if no criminal activity is detected, then they have to shut it down. So it's gotten better. We haven't had anywhere near the abuses that we had in what was it, 2005, 2007? Yeah. Since then, I think things have gotten better in Maryland. So that's not to say we have to let down our guard, but certainly things have gotten better.
Well, we launched.
Can I go just for a minute?
Oh, I was just
What
going to
is
say.
the time check?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so it's 1:15, and I think that we still have to clean up and be out of here. Is it by 9 o'clock?
Yeah.
I mean, I presume that like they'll let, I don't know. I presume it's 9 o'clock. So let's go for another 5 minutes, and then it'll take us a while to clean up, and then we can all say goodbye. I saw your hand first, and I know that you wanted to speak. And
yes, this is unrelated, but
can you give us your name, please?
Rosanna.
Hi.
I read the moment when we start having government drones spying in our living rooms and bedrooms. Is there any activity? Can we slow that process or?
That's one of the things that's on our list.
They'll start with the backyard.
Oh, that's
They
a
do that.
I think that's something that we have been interested in pursuing as we have numerous civil liberties like issues that we have on our agenda, and I think that's something that if you want to come and work with us, we'd be happy to pursue.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Maryland legislative sessions are over, so we can't get a law in Maryland, and so around the country there are lots of legislatures who are trying to put limits on drone use, and also Congress there.
Including city and county.
Okay, so Max, and then Martine, and then Darian again.
Well, since you mentioned drones, we have a film series, and we showed the 1984, Richard Burton's last film.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people have seen that film recently, but you'll see these objects outside and everybody in the room, that's a drone. This is a 1984 film. So Medea Benjamin was at Hopkins on Wednesday for a forum on drones, and she told us about the demonstration that took place in San Diego. They went to the CEO's house, and the most fascinating, well, first I'll say this, the police says you can't have that drone there. They bought a drone off the internet, you can't have that drone. It's not part of the permit. And so they said, why can't we have it? Because it's going to hurt people. And it's actually illegal in certain places, and that's something everybody's advocating to try to get ordinances passed. Virginia has passed, Idaho has passed, so that's one thing to work on. But getting back to the Maryland State Police, et cetera, as Mark was saying about this, the voluminous information, and there's nothing there. I talk about doing civil resistance in Baltimore County, she reports that. But if you see Sachs's 96 pages, the report he does, it's right in there. One of the police officers, a higher level captain, says, everybody knows Max, he's nonviolent. So it just took the air out of any possible balloon of violence, because that's something you're arguing. But the real reason they were doing all of this was to justify the $4.1 million they were getting from Homeland Security. I urge you to go back into your files and see the Bob Dreyfus article about Joint Terrorism Task Force that he wrote in the Nation magazine, June 2004. He comes to Maryland and interviews all the police chiefs about this Joint Terrorism Task Force. Well, that day I read the article, I go down to our death penalty vigil, and I say, well, you know who's going to be the terrorist groups? Pledge of Resistance, Jonah Houses, Greenpeace, that's really going to be fun. The last thing, you have to see this article. This is June 14, 2010, Greenwashing the Pentagon by Professor Joseph Nevins. If you want to see how the Pentagon is committing ecocide, that's the article.
If you give us all these references, we'll put them on our website.
Absolutely.
Okay, Martine, and then Darian, I think.
I'll pass back to go.
All right, Darian?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so,
I might chat with you people afterwards.
Please,
I mean,
We can talk as we clean up.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that, places like, Idaho and, the areas where people, fear black helicopters in the UN will in fact beat Maryland to drone legislation.
Right.
Which
So
was
this will-
Saqib's.
That is an area, I suppose, of commonality with. I think it's I don't think it will carry us too far after that. I just don't see, CAIR and.
I mean, there's lots of issues. There's no spying, surveillance. The right-wing people are concerned about that. Internet freedom, right? A lot of people are concerned about that on both sides of the aisle. So yeah, you may not like them, and you may not want to work with them in general, but on specific issues.
We want to invite them to come over here with
You
us.
guys plan to put all this good stuff on your website?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for.